I'm pretty sure that many people are familiar with Advance of Zeta and its mobile suits, but what about the men and women behind the controls of these machines? In today's episode of Gundam Lore, we're having a look at the beginnings of the Black Otter team. It all started on a normal day for Lieutenant Elliot Hunter. He had just come back from a training mission with his team when he was ordered to report to Lieutenant Commander Zirkin. This, of course, worried Elliot, and one of his friends even joked that his Newtype senses were telling him that he was gonna get reprimanded for something. But nothing could have been farther from the truth. Instead, his application to join the Titans had been approved. Even though it's what he wanted, it still took him by surprise and he was visibly shaken. Seeing this, Zirkin told him that he also needed to look the part and gave him his last order. Go show them your confidence. After a final goodbye from his friends and fellow pilots, Elliot was on his way to the Alexandria-class cruiser Oswan. And right before they landed, they were greeted by its mobile suit team. But rather than the usual Jim Quells that were operated by the Titans, the machines were modified Jim Kais. However, those machines would have to wait for later. Elliot first had to report to the main bridge, where he was treated to one hell of a sight. A fellow member of the Titans, Lieutenant Carl Matsubara, was beating another Titans officer senseless. Elliot immediately moved in to stop the fight, but the one dishing out the punches had little intention of stopping, and now went on to pick a fight with Elliot. Elliot refused to fight, but this just prompted Carl to give him a reason to fight. And now the fight was on, but it was also quickly interrupted by Lieutenant Audrey April, a member of the Black Otter team. When she then told them that she had come to welcome the new pilots of her team, they slowly realized that they were the ones, and that they would be on the same team going forward. Even though Audrey was able to somewhat cool both of them down, their hostility towards each other was still quite obvious when they reported to their team leader, Captain Wes Murphy. Rather than giving them the traditional welcome speech, he decided that it was better to show the two hotheads the machines they'd be flying. Unit 2, a Jim Kai high mobility type for Elliot, and Unit 3, a Jim Sniper 3 for Carl. Unit 1, on the other hand, was a Gundam, the TR-1 Hazel, or at the very least, it looked and performed like a Gundam, but that's a story for another time. The Black Otter team was part of the Titans test team, so officially they were a test unit, but as with a lot of things, the Titans did them slightly differently. In addition to testing out new machines and technology, they were also still hunting down Zeon remnants, hitting two birds with one stone. And so they would soon launch on their first mission with their new machines. Even though it was just a patrol mission whose main goal was to get acquainted with their mobile suits, there was still going to be a chance of meeting an enemy. And they had barely made it to the patrol area, or enemy blips already appeared on the radar. 3 Gelgoog Marine types. Carl tried sniping them as they closed in, but to no avail. The Gelgoogs dodged his shots, and one of them engaged Elliot in close combat. He tried to get rid of the bandit, but he also couldn't land a hit on it. With the Gelgoog now focused on Elliot's machine, it was Carl's chance to snipe it and score the first kill of the day, which was also his first kill ever. The mindset of the two teammates was now very different. Carl got a boost in confidence, while Elliot was in awe of the power of the beam sniper rifle. He even had to be reminded by Carl that it was his job to provide close support for the captain, a reminder that he didn't take too kindly to. Fortunately for Captain Murphy, he didn't need any support. In the time that it had taken the two rookies to take out one Gelgoog, he had managed to take out the other two, and Elliot and Carl arrived just in time to see him get rid of the final one. After this incident, it was just smooth sailing. When they then returned to the ship, Audrey was on the mobile suit deck to congratulate them on the success of their very first mission, but Elliot didn't even acknowledge her and just flew past her. Carl, on the other hand, was a lot more excited as he told her about his first kill, how he got it before Elliot, and how the beam rifle was an amazing weapon. Audrey then changed the topic to Elliot and how his bad mood might just be because of that earlier incident. An incident that Carl described as his way of greeting people. He then tried to change the topic and put his hands on Audrey's shoulder, to which she simply responded, "Your hand is shaking." Even though Carl put up a tough and cheery front, there was no denying that on the inside, he was also shaken by his first combat mission. Audrey then told him to go apologize to Elliot and went on to talk to the mechanics while still keeping an eye on the two young pilots. Carl then begrudgingly followed her advice and tried to make some small talk with Elliot and talked about how those Gelgooks were really powerful. But Elliot just coldly asked him if he was just doing this because Audrey told him to. Even though this was kinda true, the way he said it touched the nerve with Carl and prompted him to ask him what the hell his deal was. Was he still angry about him beating him up, or was it something else? Elliot responded that he'd already forgotten about the incident, and as for what was bothering him, it was something that Carl wouldn't understand anyways. This statement made Carl go over the top and he grabbed Elliot, asking if he was looking for another fight. Meanwhile, the mechanics were looking on. Hendrik, the senior mechanic, shook his head and contemplated if the Titans lacked personnel, if those were the pilots that were selected for their unit. Pete then simply shrugged and said, well, as long as they're good pilots, it doesn't really matter. But they weren't the only ones looking at this spectacle. Captain Murphy also saw everything and told them to stop making an embarrassment of themselves in front of the mechanics. Carl and Elliot then tried explaining themselves, but just ended up fighting again. And at this point, Captain Murphy had it. One more word out of them, and he'd throw them off the Oswan in their normal suits. After this, the three of them got dressed again, and now it was time for the most fun part of being a pilot, writing their report, something that especially Carl enjoyed. Once finished, both returned to their quarters, but Elliot just couldn't get this latest incident out of his head. This time, he felt responsible. Even though Carl had saved him on the battlefield, he never even said as much as a thank you to him. He decided to go set the record straight, and immediately headed over to Carl's room. But he didn't find Carl. Instead, Audrey just happened to fly by and told him that Carl wasn't in his room. It's almost as if she knew what Elliot was up to, despite him denying that he came to apologize. And to help out her Titans tsundere, Audrey gave him 2 cans of beer to start a conversation with Carl. And so Elliot headed over to the mobile suit hangar where Carl was. The first thing he found there was a model airplane that Carl made, a Spot S7, one of France's most successful aircraft from the First World War. And Carl's interest was immediately piqued when Elliot recognized the plane, and felt even more like chatting when he saw what Elliot was carrying. Audrey's plan was a complete success. First, they talked a bit more about the model airplane, and then Elliot tried apologizing. Carl didn't want to hear it though. He had already forgotten all about the incident and instead wanted to talk about other things. Things like the Gundam they had on board, the Hazel. Neither of them ever expected to be fighting alongside a real Gundam, but it was actually happening. After both of them were lost in thought about the Hazel, Elliot reached out his hand to Carl and asked him to make up. Carl got quite embarrassed about the idea, and this got even worse after Elliot again tried to thank him for the help. To which Carl simply replied that he just did it because they were a team. Still, Titan Tsundere number 2 eventually relented and said that he would be okay with shaking hands as long as they did it with their left hands. To this very weird proposition, Elliot simply burst out laughing. Unbeknownst to them though, Another person was quietly watching them from above, and she was joined by yet another person who was quite pleased to see that their two new pilots were finally beginning to get along. And that was the story of the rocky start of the Titans test team. And this is of course a saga that I will be covering more of. So be sure to leave a like if you enjoyed it and stay tuned for more similar content in the future. Personally, this is a manga that I absolutely love. The story build-up is nice, the characters and their machines aren't overpowered and face real threats, and you get to see what happened before and during the Grips conflict from a Titan's perspective. Better yet, we get to see it from the perspective of people who joined the Titans, believing that they were the aces of the Federation and that they would actually do good. Although at the same time, I must admit that the manga isn't perfect either. Especially the mobile suits are drawn relatively crudely, and when you compare them to other mangas that I've covered, they are definitely near the bottom end of the spectrum. I also felt that Carl's introduction was quite aggressive, followed by a quite quick turnaround. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure that there are actually people like that out there, so yeah. To end things on a high note then, they definitely did their best to make Advance of Zeta fit within canon, to the point that I personally just straight up consider it canon for myself. Anyways, that's all for this Gundam lore video. As always, a big thank you to the Patreon supporters. I hope all of you watching have a great day, and I'll see you all next time.